Elden Ring is a fantastic game that I've been thoroughly enjoying over the past month or so. I know I'm kind of late to the party of talking about Elden Ring, but I just got to play it recently. And while it has been a generally fun experience, I have actually found myself learning a lot of valuable skills regarding game writing and design, which I can apply to my D&D writing and worlds. Now obviously there are many specific cool world building aspects which would fit really well into most D&D campaigns, like the petrified dragons, the Erd trees, the pantheons and factions at play. There's lots of cool stuff in there, but that's not what this video is about. It's about some of the narrative and mechanical techniques that are used within Elden Ring to enhance the storytelling, which I believe are applicable to D&D. Boss fight design. The boss fights in Elden Ring are fantastic examples of dynamic, memorable, and most importantly climactic battles, which you can use in a D&D setting. Because the worst feeling as a DM is when you've talked up a character for a long time, maybe they're the BBEG or some other important player, and then you get to combat and it ends up being a forgettable slug. Video games in general, but specifically From Software, have a signature technique in boss encounters which has phases of the combat. Once the boss gets to around half health, they often go through a physical transformation and unlock new abilities or forms that they can use against the party. This is a fantastic tool for any DM to have. It improves an encounter in many ways, making it more memorable, dynamic, and unique. Imagine an encounter against a draconic sorcerer, and the fight is going pretty well for the party. They have the sorcerer on around half health, standard encounter so far, but then the sorcerer does some ritual on themselves and transforms into a dragon. Then the rest of the encounter is the party versing this new draconic form of the boss. Compare this to simply fighting a dragon or a sorcerer, and this combined boss encounter is much more engaging. There are obviously less extreme versions of this. For example, if the boss is a paladin-like fighter, after half their health is depleted, they can channel their oath and have their armor improve and glow, and their weapon transform into a more lethal version of itself, allowing them to use a new terrifying attack set. It doesn't have to be very obvious, but having this distinctive change halfway through combat will lead to more engaging encounters. As an added bonus, it is remarkably simple to create and balance an encounter this way. Simply create an encounter using two separate monsters' stat blocks and then add their CRs together. For example, for a level 14 party, you can use a CR7 spellcaster, and when they would die, have them transform into a CR7 dragon. I mean, obviously make the challenge rating at least 2 points higher than it should be, because challenge rating is a joke in 5th edition the way that most people play, but anyways, this is just a general concept that can be used also for non-spellcasting creatures, such as the paladin whose armor and weapons change. I do have one small side note about using this technique, is that it should be done sparingly, as it can be very good at highlighting the power of a boss. You don't want to be using it on every random encounter that occurs in the woods, as it'll lose its impact. And while we're still talking about boss encounters, there is another small thing that you can learn from the boss encounters in Elden Ring that makes them more memorable, and this is the location. So many of the boss fights in Elden Ring transport you to a new place for a boss battle, or obviously you go through like a misty door and are greeted by a new location, but having your boss encounters take place in a location that is visually interesting or unique or even thematically matched to the boss, this will just make your encounters much more memorable, and you can tie in lair actions and environmental factors with this, and it'll just improve the overall boss encounter design. Creature design. Now I know this is adjacent to boss encounters and boss design, but I am talking just in a very broad sense. Just wandering the world, you find so many phenomenally designed creatures that would often be a perfect fit for a D&D setting. They are creepy, interesting, and often have unique weaknesses, which is one of my biggest issues with standard monsters in D&D. They rarely have vulnerabilities, and almost never have vulnerabilities tied to their biology, such as the stomach of a dragon being weaker, or the eyes of a giant spider being vulnerable, or something like this. Including these small details will make your encounters more memorable, and I highly suggest bringing these into your games if you can manage it. Doing this does require some more encounter prep, such as separate health bars and ACs for certain body parts and the resulting effect of those taking damage, but in some cases this can lead to really awesome encounters. Additionally, this is a way of rewarding your players for noticing and learning about the lore regarding the creatures in your world. It makes your world feel alive. And speaking of a living world, A living world. The world of Elden Ring is undoubtedly alive. There are creatures stronger than you, there are factions doing their things regardless of you, and the world doesn't feel catered to you at all. If anything, you feel like an invader to the status quo. This world feels so lived in, and it gives it such a great depth, and it just makes everything feel real, which therefore increases your engagement as a player. This is what we ultimately want from our world building, to engage our players. A world has people, factions, creatures, locations, and much more that are not just made for your party to explore. You could get somewhere and find that there isn't specific loot for you or a reason to explore this space. While this may feel disappointing to the party, it also does make the world feel real. The world was not made for your party, unless it was, which is a fully valid campaign idea, but in most cases, your party are just some regular people in the world. Their actions should influence it, but the world should not be catered for them. A way you can get this effect without just having random buildings that your party go into and find nothing in, which could get super tedious, is having stories and events that don't relate to your party and potentially never will. Potentially a war regarding factions on a different side of the continent, or even in the castle there was a coup and a big drama. But it's not for the party. Like, they can go there and they're like, yeah, we don't need your help. This just happened. The king got assassinated, you know? Potentially that could be a plot thread later on, but the world has to have things going on that don't relate to the party. The power of confinement. Having your story take place in a location that is closed off from the rest of the world will force your players to engage with the world that you have presented them. Often a problem with creating an entire planet or continent or whatever it is that the party can just kind of get bored or overwhelmed, or you missed a few sessions and they forgot what's happening. They're like, hey, we're done with this arc, we're done with this city, whatever it is, see you later, we're going over there, and they just point at the map and walk over there. This can be fun. If you like D&D campaigns like this, then go ahead, more power to you. But this, in my opinion, can lead to disjointed storytelling, as they are leaving the setup of a space that you have created in favor of something new. Confining players to a location forces them to engage with it without railroading them, as there aren't any other continents or locations they can go to. It's not even an option that you're taking away from them, it's simply the situation of the world they are in. Confining players to a location forces them to engage with it, which can just lead to a more coherent story. They aren't distracted by, ooh, what's over there? Ooh, what's over here? They are just in this situation, and it is a confined situation, so they just have to deal with the world in front of them. It's also way easier as a DM, you only need to plan one little area instead of vaguely knowing what's on another continent. I did this for a weekend-long mini-campaign that I ran. I teleported my players into a demi-plane, and then I didn't need to write any lore for the world before, because the whole story would just take place in this demi-plane. And then they instantly had to engage and interact with the factions and locations in front of them and discover the lore. I only had to make lore for one little area instead of a whole world and its history. An added bonus is that the party will, 9 times out of 10, have a potential arc of trying to escape this demi-plane, and then they're already engaged in a story. You didn't even have to drop a plot hook, they are just already hooked because something happened to them. They were moved from their home. Now we are talking about D&D, a magical world, so there are so many ways you can do it. It can be a fog barrier, a demi-plane, a force field, maybe the story takes place on an isolated island and the ocean is too treacherous to travel. Or maybe it takes place on flying islands and there are no forms of flight available to the people, so they just have to live on the island and do what's on the island. There are many ways to make it happen, and in my opinion, this confinement will force your players to interact with the world you have given them. But obviously this will vary greatly depending on what D&D group you're in, and your whole campaign shouldn't be confined because that can be a bit claustrophobic. I'm just saying that sometimes confinement can be a powerful tool. Touching on an aspect of confinement that Elden Ring does, which is super video gamey, but it could potentially work in a campaign, is the forced boss encounters. How basically the only way to progress into a new area in this world is fighting this boss. This can work in a D&D campaign, but be careful because it could be a bit too railroady or confined for some players. The magic system. I found that the magic system in Elden Ring was great. Sorcery or faith, it's kind of like divine magic or arcane magic in D&D, and I just found the elementally themed schools of magic to be so much more cinematic and understandable than the standard D&D schools of magic. I really like the idea of unlocking certain spells after spending times in relevant areas or in that element. Let's say you go to a desert, you unlock sand magic, you go to a volcano, you unlock lava magic. This just makes more sense to me than the current D&D spell lists and schools and all of that, and I think that it can be used really well and even expanded upon. Now, I'm not saying that I don't like D&D magic schools. I do. I like them a lot. I think they are very interesting. However, I find that just a themed magic system can work a bit better. Potentially all teleportation magic is in one school called teleportation, or something like that. And then there's also all of the different elements, fireball, firebolt, for fire breath, all of those spells can be fire magic and lava magic. I don't know. There's just something to that is more tangible to me than evocation, transmutation, all of those. One of the strengths of using a magic system that is more themed in the way of Elden Ring is that as the story progresses and the party go to new places, they can learn new spells, which I just think is really cool. Like, I think it's fun. The party get a tangible reward for exploring a place. And if it's for martials, you can do fighting styles. Maybe they learn the equivalent of Ash of Wars, but off a different location. They learn a sandy Ash of War. They learn a lightning Ash of War for fighting in those locations. I don't know, it's just something that I personally really want to explore in the future in my campaigns. That's me, that's this video. I don't have anything else to say. See you next time.